When you see shots like this, ooh, and shots like this, you know where we're going to go, don't you? It's going to be the St. Luke's Model Train Exhibition for 2019. This is a very, very delayed upload because I had all sorts of problems with my Apple iMac, yes. Do you know about fusion drives and how they go wrong? Well, yes, I had a fusion drive failure. This video was being edited right at the time that my crapple went crapple. I ended up with a lot of damaged files. I had to use a data recovery company to get this project back. And I had to rebuild my computer with a SSD hard drive and get rid of that wretched fusion drive idea. This video was like a video project that just said to me, I don't want to be finished. I'm going to do everything I can to be difficult to you. And I've spent thousands and thousands of dollars to get to this point, to get the data back. So if it seems like this isn't my usual, let's take a look at the train show video. Well, I hope you understand what I've been through to get to this point. Okay, let's do it. The first layout we're going to take a look at, it's called Alternative Tracks by Daniel Thompson. And I'm reading from a little brochure here. This N-scale American layout features a double-track main line running along a river valley. The innovative, or maybe we could say a word like ingenious, 160-degree angle between the baseboard sections allows the line to be laid on a gentle curve and draws the viewer in to the scene portrayed. I think that means if you stand in the right spot, you get sucked into the scenery. There's a bit of a scale cheat going on here with the scenery around those wonderful N-scale trains. Yes, the next layout, it's called Toowong. It's displayed by the East Hills Model Railway Club. This N-scale layout represents a typical branch line station in the southwest slopes Snowy Mountains area of New South Wales Victorian border. Well, I'll tell you something about that part of town today as I'm putting this video together. It's all burnt out, so this layout would be crispy critter if we looked at it as it is today. Heavily affected by fires, all crispy critter. Reading on, sorry for that interruption. The buildings are models of actual structures, well they're all burnt out now, and the trains reflect largely agricultural nature of the area. Ah yes, the wonderful glory of N-scale. This was a two-sided display, but it was very difficult to see the other side because it was up against the wall. It was one of those displays, so much to look at you could basically stand there for the best part of a day and see something fresh in your eyes. I just hope I've got enough of this video salvaged from my iMac crash to warrant the wonderfulness of this N-scale railway. When I read that Toowong is on the western slopes of the Snowy Mountains, I just Google searched Toowong fires, and this was the sort of results that I was seeing. It looks pretty bad down there. It looks like they've had a very tough time with those massive fires in Australia.
What I'm doing is taking this one off and putting another train on.
That's that kind of.
The next layout's one of my favourites. It's always there. It's called Age Continplated. It's by the St. Luke's Railway Modelers. This Hornby 3-rail layout features models that were made in mainly the 50s and early 60s, and many of the scenic features are die-cast models that date back to the same era as well. Very much the classic time for model railways. If you were a kid back then, you just didn't know how good you were getting it. Because sadly, all this ended up turning into plastic trash fantastic. The next layout, I'm just going to do a little itty bitty sneak peek because I'm going to do something very nice for the person who owns this layout. I'm going to make for him a nice standalone video on YouTube about his layouts. It's called Argile Iron Works. It's run by a gentleman called Chris Frazier, and the scale is ON30. And Chris, the year before, had a layout called Cheap as Chips, I hope I'm correct there, and his modelling style is all about making the layout in a very inexpensive way, using everyday objects to detail your layout, and best of all, and this is what I like about Chris, is he allows children at the show to run the railway on his plank or shunting type of layout. Now I can tell you this, as soon as you hand a child one of those DCC controllers to one of these miraculous railways, their desire to have one of these at home goes completely through the roof. This is one of the secrets to keeping this type of hobby alive, and a lot of people don't understand this, but Chris does. Last year, his wonderful layout got buried at the end of a long video, but I am going to do that standalone video for him because I tell you what, in my books, he's number one. The next layout is by far the most popular layout at the St. Luke's Model Railway Show. It's free! It's the Thomas & Friends U-Drive. It features the rare and highly desirable Hornby Thomas & Friends model trains. It's complete chaos. Normally Duck is the one causing troubles here. So let's just watch this play out, and we may even see the hand of God come in and save Thomas and his friends.
Stop there.
Stop it by moving that to around about 3 o'clock.
No faster.
Otherwise it might fall off.
Yeah.
Stop number 8, please. And the good shot here.
And then you turn it back. You stop first. Stop first. And then try that. Yeah. Slow down.
Okay, number 4, go again. Okay, off you go.
The next layout is from the North Shore Model Railway Association Junior Group Module 3. Now this layout to me typifies a very typical and common railway that you would see children playing with in Australia. I've got no info on the scale of this railway. I'm assuming it's 00 scale because that's the most common scale in Australia. It's very similar to HO scale. It starts World War III when you start talking about differences in scale with model railways. It is actually a very complex and very deep bunny hole once you start going down there. The different scales seem to be divided by manufacturers, also divided by countries, and also people into model railways may devise a funky new scale to play with, often by combining two well-established scales. There's two main associations that have guidelines for modelers to adhere to. One of them is the NMRA, the National Model Railway Association, sort of North American bound, and the other one is the NEM, and that's associated with the European standards. Then there's other countries that do their own thing. Lots of this stuff does overlap when it comes to playing with trains. But to get to my point here, I found one illustration that takes out a lot of the confusion and delay when you're trying to get your head around the different gauges and scales related to model railways. For me, this is a fantastic picture. I can see the model railway scales in relation to the size of a human being, and on this picture, it really highlights the awesomeness of G-scale. Now, many years ago when I made the Mad Bomber video, I was struggling with scale. I had Erdl toy trains, and they're smaller than HO, but could also squeeze onto N-gauge track as well. And this starts the conundrum of understanding a gauge of a track versus a scale, and to explain it simply, you can put a different scale of train onto a different gauge of track, and I think a great example, and I've got good video of this layout, is one called JB Mining, and I videoed this at the previous year's St. Luke's exhibition. JB Mining is HOE scale. That's a HO scale train on a N-gauge track, which is 9mm in width. But what's very tricky here, and I did explain this in last year's video, is the sleepers and ties on the railway are spaced out a bit further to conform to HOE scale. And I remember last year I flip-flopped between the images of HOE scale and N-scale railway, and then you start to see the trickery going on. You've got the same gauge track, but you've got two totally different scales playing on the same type of track. And then people ask, why would you bother mixing scale and gauge? Well, JB Mining is a great explanation of that because you get a good amount of detail because it's a larger scale, and for a small amount of real estate, you can get a very interesting and intricate layout because you're only dealing with N-gauge track. Well, that just derailed a bit, didn't it? I was talking about my struggles in making Mad Bomber. Let's get back to it. Anyway, luckily for me, down the road there was this fantastic model railway shop. It was owned by a gentleman called Peter Leggett. Sadly, he's passed away for many years now. And he gave me some fantastic information in relation to scale and gauge. But he also hammered into my brain. He said, Leo, if you ever get into model railway seriously, do not mess with anything but G-scale. It will give you the best satisfaction and bang for buck. And always in his store, he had a G-scale train running a shunting circuit right down in the middle of his shop. So when you walked in there, where did your eyes go? Bang, straight to the G-scale. But what this picture is really good at illustrating is how similar HO and OO scales are. And to most people who don't know what they're looking at, HO and OO look basically the same. But if you're the sort of person who knows how to count their rivets on model trains, you'll know exactly what's going on between the two. Anyway, after that massive derailment from this video, let's get back to the layout that we're meant to be looking at. I won't say too much over this, but the train that caught my eye and the one I really liked was the really long one carrying those military trucks and tanks and whatnot. That did it for me.
Yeah.
Hey Jack, how
Now it's connected. Here we go. Good way you are. You want to take the video.
Very good Anacon material, isn't it?
Bring it on, bring it on.
Yeah.
We will start by looking at this picture when we talk about the next layout. It's called Bulls Bridge Wharf. It's by Michael Flack. And I'm just reading here, this O-scale narrow gauge layout shows the interface between a canal and a railway and is set in Derbyshire in the 1930s. The canal barge and buildings are scratch built from card and the locomotive modified from American models. This was a beautiful display, more about the scenery and the tricks going on here versus the railway. And when I heard the name Michael Flack, I did ask, I said, are you connected to Smuggler's Cove? And just to have a reminisce, Smuggler's Cove is this most amazing model railway scenery, I'll call it, because it's more about the scenery than the trains. And it was made by Jeff Knott, who unfortunately passed away a few years back now, and Michael Flack. At this train show, Michael was very impressed that I remembered Smuggler's Cove. How could you forget a piece of work like that? It is totally unbelievable. And I asked Michael, what's the situation with Smuggler's Cove today? Because years back I was told this was headed to America. And so luckily Michael filled me in. It's really nice getting information from a close source to the actual model, not someone who's heard from somebody else. Michael told me that Smuggler's Cove, yes, it has gone to the USA, to the NMRA Model Railway Museum in Sacramento. The first thing that came into my mind is, how would you package something so intricate and delicate and send it overseas? Michael did say it took a number of years to get this sorted out, and I knew that. But I can tell you this, having Smuggler's Cove go to the USA, it's our loss and America's gain. It is an incredible piece of work. I feel privileged that I was able to see it and put a camera over it quite some years back at the Epping Model Railway exhibition. Now, I'd love to know from my American friends over there who may go to this museum, I believe it's new, if they have seen this set up or if the museum is open. I was told about this in May 2019. Like I said earlier, this is a very delayed upload, and I can only assume it's going to take a little bit of time to get the displays installed and running correctly before people in the USA can come to this museum and see this incredible work. And the bits and bobs I read about this Model Railway Museum in Sacramento is it's packed with the best of the best from around the world. It would be a fantastic place to go there with your best video camera and make some really nice videos. I do like it when a story has an end chapter, and Jeff Knott and Michael Flack's work is right up there with the best you're ever going to see when it comes to displaying model railways. Because of the wonders of the internet, I did look online and tried to find this museum, and what I found via the NMRA website was artists' illustration of what's going to go on in there. So as I'm making this video, I don't think that museum's actually up and running yet, but there'll be people on the ground in the USA who will tell me exactly what's going on and when it's there, if it's there. This video was a nightmare to finalize. There's a couple of layouts that I just didn't have enough salvaged video from my crashed iMac. I did get a little bit of footage of Legoxland or Legoland. Richie Doolan, who makes this, it's always different. There's always something new and funky that he's done, and I think it really shows the wonderfulness of Lego in all its glory. This video came so close to just being pushed into the bin, it's not funny. One major problem I had is the files that were affected by the hard drive crash, and that was the ones that were on the platted drive, because a Fusion drive is a combination of an SSD and a platter drive. Those files would always crash Premiere, that is the affected files, and I thought I'll put them into Adobe Media Encoder and re-encode the videos so there's something that Premiere will like, but what I found was Adobe Media Encoder would also crash in the same way that Premiere would crash. It never used to be like that. The earlier versions of Adobe Media Encoder would basically handle anything and not fall over when you were trying to rectify problems with files. But the way around for me was to use the wonderful free program called Handbrake. And I'd whiz the damaged video files through Handbrake and it turned them into nice stable files that wouldn't crash Adobe Premiere. I'm just pleased that I got to the end of this and was able to make something out of what I had. I lost about 25% of the video that I shot. And let me please finish on this final read here, because people are going to argue about scale versus gauge. Although most people would never watch the end of the video, about 1% of the audience get to this point. And I found this on one of the many Wikipedia pages about model railways. And I'm reading here, the gauge of a railway system is the distance between the inside edge of the railheads. It is distinct from the concept of scale, though the terms are often used interchangeably in rail modelling. And sure, I'm a person who's done that many times in the past, and let me read on here. Scale describes the size of a model object relative to its prototype. Prototype rail systems use a variety of track gauges. I was sort of talking about that before. So, several different gauges can be modelled at the same scale. And reading on a bit more, the gauges used in HO scale are a selection of standard and narrow gauges. The standards for these gauges are defined by the NMRA in North America and the NEM in continental Europe, and I sort of spoke about that before in the video as well. While the standards are in practice interchangeable, there are minor differences, and I think that's where the real rivet counters come in and they can spot those minor differences. And I better throw up the attributes to that wonderful image that I showed that really illustrates the different scales in relation to each other with model railways. My crikeys, I think this is one of the most arduous and difficult videos that I've ever put together on YouTube. It's taken literally months to get to this point. Thank goodness I'm done. I can't wait for my 10 cents from Google. It's just not worth making content like this anymore on YouTube.